teach us how to be kind
All right,
parents.
you're unmuted. You've got 3 viewers. 2.
I'm unmuted now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Amanda. I've been a therapist for about 15 years. I started kind of my work in outpatient, took a stint in the school system because I thought I needed insurance. Turns out I don't. And so went back to outpatient and have been primarily working with kids 10 through 18, and then adults. So when Bev asked me to do a topic, she asked me about teenagers, which is kind of my jam, but she also asked about talking about kindness, and I just love the idea. And I slept on it and thought, this is what I need to do. This is what's speaking to me right now. So these are my kids. Most of y'all know them, Audrey, Hoke, and Abby. I put them up there not to say that they're the kindest kids in the world, because I know they're not, as my oldest called my youngest a doofus just this morning. But just so that you know who I am and as a part of the school community, because I know most of the people who are watching are, related to our school in some way. So today I'm going to talk about parenting kind kids. I'm a huge believer in parenting hard. I don't believe in passive parenting at all. I believe in, being there for your kids and helping them navigate, because their brains are not developed yet. And so, however that has to happen, I think is super important. So that's kind of my disclaimer, is that I'm not saying my kids are the kindest in the world. I'm not saying I'm the kindest in the world, but I'm working on it every day. So, okay. I found this quote, and you'll see lots of quotes. I'm a quote person. I know, I'm a therapist. That's what we do. But when words are both true and kind, they can change the world. So a lot of the time I work with my own children about speaking honestly, but speaking honestly in a way that other people can hear you. And if you make people defensive, they are no longer listening to what you're saying. And so I think everything we say in this, parenting space is safe, and we need to feel like we can talk about it and not get defensive. And I'll tell you stories about my kids who are far from perfect, and hopefully you feel like you can also share stories about situations that you've had, and we can talk through those as well. So, okay, so I believe in Jesus, and so this is something I kind of keep in the back of my head. My husband does the golden rule. Like, that's the thing that keeps in the back of his head. Am I doing the right thing? But I'm a little more cynical than he is, and probably not as great as a Christian as he is. But so my whole thing is, Jesus loves you, and I'm trying. I'm really trying. And so when people are not kind to me, I try to keep that in the back of my head. Like, how can I just remain calm and do the right thing? Because you can do all the right things and have a really crappy situation. And so that's kind of the part that people get stuck in. Like, I've done all the right things and this still didn't turn out the way I wanted to. And so how do you make the next right step? All right. So now we're talking about kind of the school as a whole, what we see in teenagers. So, when I was young, they talked about how, like, Japan was kicking our butt in education. They are, like, really doing the things, while they have, like, the highest suicide rate in the world. So we have to figure out what the balance is. And I don't think we're there yet. I think we're trying to figure out where that pendulum will stop. So we go from being, like, too structured, too intense, to being like willy-nilly, everyone's fine. It's okay for anybody to do whatever they want to do. And so I think there's a balance there that we have to find. So we're seeing a lot of things within this cultural shift, and I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that COVID was not a part of that. It is. But bigger than that, we are increasingly putting value on individualism at the expense of other people. We are not seeing a lot of consequences from parents. If you talk to any teacher, the thing that they say, that when a kid gets in trouble at school because they've done something corrected, They don't feel the parental support there. And so I think that's a huge part. A lot of self-centered behaviors. We have a whole like me first kind of attitude, which is sometimes needed, but we've developed this whole like identity around that, like that's okay. And loss of respect from authority figures. You look at anything in the news and you see those kinds of things playing out. We have lots of competitive students who wants to, have the highest GPA and, be the valedictorian and all of those things that are important. But there needs to be a cutoff there. But we're seeing a lot of sad students as well. The amount of kids that I see with depression has increased in the last 15 years. I can't even tell you. I can't put a number on it, but I see a lot of really depressed kids. And before, like 15 years ago, I would say that when I'm diagnosing a kid, I would give them adjustment disorder. I would say they're adjusting to some life situation, and that's difficult. But now I can give a straight diagnosis for depression on the first meeting with a teenager. With a kid, with a 10-year-old, we should be able to do that. I mean, that's hard. And just stress students. We have all the anxiety. The parents have all the anxiety. The kids have all the anxiety. We're just swimming in it. So like just being aware that some of this cultural shift has been really negative for us, and we're not even really talking about it. All right, so some things to consider. And I know our school cares very deeply about this, but a student's emotional IQ is as important as their academic skill set. So I know I'm a therapist and really dig the emotional IQ, but I mean, have you ever worked with somebody who has like zero clue what they're doing emotionally? That's a problem. And they could have a great skill set in knowing what they're doing, but if they can't get along with other people, you really have trouble working with them. So emotional IQ has to do with a lot more things than just understanding whose emotions and what emotion is going on in the room. So self-awareness, I would say that's the biggest part of why people come to a therapist anyway, right? They want to know why they feel what they feel, what's going on with them. They want to know why their behavior is a certain way. And so that's super important. Self-regulation. So as I'm like writing these down, Abby, my middle child, says, "I don't have any of that, Mom." I'm like, "Yeah, you're working on it." So, but how insightful is it for her to be like, "I'm not good at that yet." So self-regulation is being able to control your emotions, being able to control your behavior, not being impulsive, all of those things that our kids naturally are because they're kids. I'll say this over and over again, their brain doesn't develop till 25. And we ask a lot of them. So social awareness. I think that has taken one of the biggest hits since COVID. Like, being able to read a room, being able to know what's going on with somebody else without somebody saying, "Hey, I'm having a hard time." That is, honestly, it's a gift to be able to read a room like that. And then conflict management skills. We all want to learn better. We all want to learn how to fight fairly and how to not totally damage our relationships when we have a disagreement. And so when we are looking at those things for our children, they know nothing of any of these things. And so it's our job as parents and as teachers and as community members to teach that and to also make sure that they see that in us, because modeling is so important. All right. So if we buy into all that, which I do clearly, but if we buy into all of that, then we have to think about what changes. Okay. And so these are some of the things we're going to talk through. These are things that I think it's important that our community focuses on, that we as parents focus on, that our teachers keep in the back of their heads. These are the things that I think can make any environment safer for kids, right? And safer for us. Okay, so when we talk about change is hard. Nobody feels great about going into change. It's the biggest concern people have when they come to therapy. Like, you're asking me to change this? Well, you can keep doing it the same way, but it's not going to help you any. So change is uncomfortable, and being aware that it's going to be uncomfortable when you're making those changes is important. And if anybody's talked to me more than twice, like my biggest saying is like, give yourself grace to really figure it all out. Like, give yourself time. So there are some stages of change. I'll go through them really quickly, just because I think they're great. Like the pre-contemplation is like being in denial, like living there. My husband says that he feels like it's a great place. That's his happy place. That's his jam. And I'm always like, Jonathan, that's not the thing. But he is perfectly happy there. And then contemplation, being aware of the problem, and what needs to change, right? Preparation is like making a plan. And some people get stuck in making a plan and then never jump. Action could take a long time, right? You could stay in the action phase for a long time. And then maintenance, nothing is ever going to be better if you can't figure out how to maintain it, right? So in trying to create change, I feel like there's a couple of things that need to happen. I believe in teaching. I teach my kids all day long. They probably get very annoyed. But that's just having a safe and open dialogue, right? So my kids feel like they can tell me anything. And I went to a workshop one time, and she said the best thing that you can tell your kids is you can say anything to me and we will figure it out, right? So if you come to me in high school and say so-and-so is using drugs in the bathroom, great, let's talk that through, right? I don't want you to ever be fearful to come to me, right? Because that's how lots of really negative things happen for kids. And just being open to, we don't have secrets. You can tell me anything, right? Modeling, right? So our kids learn the most from modeling, right? They watch us day in and day out. So practicing what you preach, right? So one of the things that I commonly say to my kids, are you being your best self right now? And that is for them to reflect, right? I'm not saying you're being kind of a jerk. I'm saying, think about what you're doing and try to fix it. And then if you come into trouble, I will help you. Experiential learning with follow-up reflection. So I think we do a great job of saying, all right, let's figure this out. Let's let you figure it out. Let's let you problem solve. But then there's no follow-up. And as a parent or as a teacher or as a community member, there needs to be a time set aside for you to go, so what worked and what didn't work? And how do you feel about what happened here? Because that all matters. Because if they feel uncomfortable, they're not going to do it again. And it may have been the right thing. And so trying to make sure that all of those things are taken into account. I had a real issue with experiential learning with no follow-up. So, all right, so we're going to go through these things that I think are important. If you come away with nothing else today besides the fact that I say teach 5 times and that I think that that's so important, I'll be happy with that. Because kids are not naturally kind people. They're not born like, I'm so sweet and kind. They are naturally very self-centered humans, and that's okay. So we have to teach all these things. All right. So empathy, which often gets confused with sympathy, but they're not the same thing, right? Sympathy is like feeling bad for someone, right? Empathy is the ability to recognize, understand, and share the feelings of another. In short, it's putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So one of the ways that this is teachable, and I use a lot of questioning with my kids. I rarely tell them the answer. I question them to help them think through it because they'll come up with the answer on their own. They really will. And so when I'm asking questions, I ask, well, what do you think that other person was thinking? What do you think the other person was feeling? And my kids will say, I don't know if they have problems at home, Mom. And I'm like, that's not what I'm asking. But that's what they think I'm trying to get at, right? And so it's important to ask them what role you think the other person was playing, what role you were playing in the conflict, whatever that looks like. Or even in the small little experience that they had. Like, what does that look like? I think empathy is as important as academic rigor. Knowing what is going on with someone else and being able to figure that out is important. It decreases bullying, right? If you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes, even for a second, it's hard to be mean to them, right? And so it decreases narcissism, thinking you're the best. I'm the best. And aggression and hatred. And I think those are all important. And it requires ongoing work with strong empathetic leaders, right? So if you're not empathetic towards other people, your kids are not going to be empathetic towards other people. So social emotional learning, which we do here at Salisbury Academy, and Allison Dobie does a fabulous job with that. I hear all about it regularly because my kids know I really care about it, which I always think is funny. They never come to me to talk to me about math, but I do think that's important too. And having that emotional IQ, can you read the emotion in the situation? And that's something that you teach regularly, like, and even so kids with like special needs or, autism, like when one of my children was little, we would go through and go, okay, what does this face look like? What does this face look like? What is this? And that's very simple, but you would be amazed at how many teenagers I get who have experienced major trauma, who have no idea. And I'm like, that's the face you think is sadness? That's not what I would have said. And so trying to help kids figure that out from an early age is important. All right. So American teens are 40% less empathetic than they were decades ago, which is a scary, but what are our thoughts about why that could be? You have to participate.
Screens. You can say something through a screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no responsibility there. You can just sit and throw it out there and be like, oh, this just happened. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we know through research that the digital focus reduces the ability to read emotions. We know that. Face-to-face connection is the key to a healthy emotional IQ. So, when we're going through COVID, right, everybody's transitioned to craziness. We're doing Zooming, but even Zooming is not helpful, because you get that Zoom tired, right? And also you miss all the body language of a person. So I do Zoom with some of my clients. A lot of them are people that I've known for years and years and years. And so it's easier for me to know what's going on with them. But I refuse to Zoom with a couple. I don't know if you've ever been to couples counseling, but that's a strong no for me. So I love doing couples work, but I need them to both be present and I need to be able to watch each one of them. And so all of those things are very important. Now, do I think there's space and time for Zoom? Yes, but I think there has to be a balance in both things. All right. So we can't talk about being unkind to people without talking about insecurity, because that's a lot of where these unkind behaviors come from, right? So arrogance is the camouflage of insecurity. So when I think about people who like look tough and, I think of those animals in the desert who like puff up, like so that they're bigger than they should be, so that they can scare things away. Like if I met a bear, I would probably look tougher than I am, right? And so in order to reduce insecurity, we've got to recognize emotions non-judgmentally. Okay. That's a lot of words, but what it really means is to be able to validate what kids are feeling, right? When they come to you and they've had a terrible day and they get in the car and, the teenage drama whatever teenage drama has happened, and there's tears and there's anger and all of that stuff. Okay, I really see that this is hard for you right now. You're having a tough time. You look really upset. That goes a long way for just acknowledging their experience. And so being able to put words to it for them is helpful because they're not always able to put words through it themselves. Setting achievable goals. Okay, so I am not, we all get a trophy. I'm just not. I've never seen that work out well for anyone. But I do think knowing what your kid can do is important and setting achievable goals. So the things that I would ask my oldest to do, I would never ask my middle to do. The things that I would ask my oldest to do, I would never ask my youngest to do, and vice versa, because they're different humans. And so making sure that their goals are achievable. Because what happens is if you are setting these, like, everybody has to meet these standards, well, that's great, but the kid who fails multiple times is going to quit on you. And that's it. And then they develop a whole lot of other problems as a result. So making sure you're setting achievable goals as a parent, as a teacher, as a community. And I see parenting as being part of that. Like, it's okay for one of our children to be a little further behind. It's okay for them to be slower to get it than others, right? That's okay. Allow for setbacks and don't panic when they fail. So I see this happen all the time, right? In order to learn something, you have to fail over and over and over again. And you can't be afraid to experience that. And that's where a lot of anxiety for kids comes from, like being so fearful that they won't get it right. Who cares? We're all learning, right? So it's okay. If you come home with a bad grade, you come home with a bad grade. You didn't understand. How do we fix it? All right. Challenge negative thinking. This one's hard for all peoples everywhere. So challenging negative thinking, you can go to a deep, dark place pretty fast. Our brains are really good at it. And so being able to think through the process and really stop yourself from going to that deep, dark place. That's kind of why I remind all my clients, give yourself grace. It's okay. You don't have to be perfect, right? Spending time with positive people. So my husband listens to all the financial podcasts, which is really ridiculously boring, but that's what he does in his spare time. And it sounds like he's a fun guy. So he was listening to this podcast, and this was like 3 or 4 years ago, and it said that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time around. Okay. So he brought this to me because he was like, listen to what I learned today. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so I was preparing myself because I don't know anything about the retirement and all the things. But he was right. And I think it's really a great way to look at it. Are you hanging out with the 5 people that you feel like can challenge you, can make you a better person, can support you when you need to be supported? Make sure those 5 people are good people. Our kids are around people all day long. As adults, we're around less people, and so making sure that you're choosing to hang with the people who can give you those things. All right. And seek help with anxiety. So you don't know how many times people reach out to me and say, my kid is really experiencing anxiety. And I think to myself, you're also experiencing a lot of anxiety. But and because we're connected in that way to our children, right? So when things are going bad for our kids, it feels bad for us too. But know when to reach out for help. This is not a therapy plug, but it kind of is. Know when it's above your pay grade, right, as a parent. And that's okay. I think the other thing that I would say to that is sometimes your kid just needs somebody else to talk to, and it can't be you. And that's okay too, right? That's not a diss. I don't even know if we say that anymore, but that's not towards you. That is because they need to bounce something off of somebody else. One of the things that I think is important, and I do for my kids, is I go ahead and pinpoint adults that I feel like are healthy that you can go to, right? So people, for me, like people in my church that I know have my back and believe the same ways I believe, and they can go to them for anything. And recently, my oldest, I found out, went to one of my closest friends to talk to her about, some things that were going on with her. And I was so proud. I was so thankful that she could do that. And I didn't take offense to it. Like, she didn't want to talk to me. She needed somebody else to talk to, and she got that. All right. Kindness begins with the understanding that we all struggle. So back to kind of having the empathy and being aware that, everybody sucks sometimes. We all do, right? We all have trouble sometimes, right? And that's okay. All right. Self-confidence. We can't talk about this without talking about self-confidence, because a lot of trouble comes from self-confidence. I see a lot of adults with problematic self-confidence. I see a lot of teenagers and a lot of kids. So self-confidence really is trusting your abilities, qualities, and judgment. And when you are a self-confident person, you can be open to learning from and being flexible with others, right? Because it's not a personal attack on you when it doesn't go well. It just didn't go well. And so one of the things that my kids always drive me crazy with is they'll ask me a question, and it's a good question because I love questions. I'm like, ooh, what are you thinking about? Cool. So they ask me a question, and then they say, oh, I know. No, you didn't know. You asked me. And so I will say, no, that's not what this is. It's okay to be curious and want to know about these things. It's okay not to know the answer. You just need to know who to go to. Like, we as adults know that, right? I am not the technology guru in my family. So if I have a concern, I'm going to ask my husband. I am not the person who you go to with math homework, and that's okay. Nana, fabulous. Go across the way, right? So, knowing your strengths and weaknesses and being able to help kids understand that you go to somebody else if you have a question. Is not comparative or competitive. Okay, so I see a lot of this. We're in the age of, everybody shows their Facebook wins, right? And so we were sitting there and we're scrolling and seeing like all this, like how wonderful people have it, and think, ooh, am I not living my very best life? Because that's concerning, right? But in reality, if we're confident people, it's okay, right? It's not a personal thing, right? I don't have to compare myself to other people. I talk a lot about competitiveness because I think competitiveness can really be a difficult thing to figure out as a kid. And even as an adult, sometimes it's hard to figure it out. So there's a place for competitiveness. Don't get me wrong. It pushes you to do well in lots of things. But it's not everywhere, right? So I think we as, a society try to get people to be competitive because we think that's going to be their very best self. And some of that is true, but it also makes people not care about other people as much. And so there's a balance there, and kids have trouble really figuring that out. Like, when should I be competitive and when should I be a good friend? And so I think that that's important. I was really proud of one of my kids, who really wanted to do well in the spelling bee and didn't make it into the spelling bee, and said that she really was proud of her other friend for doing well. And I thought, ooh, that gives me chill bumps. Like, I'm proud of those kinds of things. So we know that there are less bullying behaviors when kids have higher self-esteem. We also know that they are less likely to be a victim if they have higher self-esteem, because they can let that stuff roll, right? If somebody's unkind to me, I can let it roll off my back. I just love this quote. Comparison is the thief of joy. I like the other one, so there you have it. There you have it. All right. So confidence without being self-centered. So this is what we work on all day, every day at the Thyroid household. So when we're self-centered, we believe that we know best, and we no longer feel like we need to learn from others, right? So all of the bad things happen as a result of this, right? So racism, sexism, misogyny, hatred of other people's lifestyle, religious hatred, all come from valuing one's own group perspective over another, right? And so how do we foster self-confidence without fostering self-centered behaviors or selfish behaviors? What are some thoughts?
Goes back to empathy.
Goes back to empathy. Absolutely. Goes back to reminding kids about how do you think that other person felt. Goes back to also questioning your kids. How do you feel, right? And being able to talk through all those things without that judgment, right? So I want to know what you're thinking, and then I want to also offer you some suggestions. All right, cooperation versus competition. So I know you know these words, but I think it's always interesting to see them together, because cooperation is a shared sense of purpose and understanding the skills and talents each person has. So some of the biggest, greatest corporations do all this, right? And I encourage my kids, when they're doing group work at school, find out who's the best illustrator, put them on drawing. Who's the best one at, and use your talents, right? So that you can create something really beautiful. Recognizing that you're a part of a larger society. I think our school does a really great job of this in general. Like, I think Salisbury Academy has a great sense of community within it. And I think that that's so important. Competition is internal challenges or external threats, right? So, the spelling bee, is that a challenge? Yes, great, right? And that's a healthy challenge, right? But it can be intimidating for people, right? So people don't try new things because they're afraid that they might be made fun of, or they might have a really negative experience, and can have a negative effect on your self-esteem, right? So one of the things that when my children, I talk a lot about them because I'm with them a lot, but when my children say things like, I'm not good at such and such, it's true. They are not stupid. They know when they are not good at a task, when that's difficult for them. And so I will say, so what are you good at, right? You may not be good at fill in the blank. What are you good at? Because that's a longer list. And helping them figure that out. So as you can tell, I parent hard. We can't leave this conversation about kindness and not talk about the buzzword, right? Bullying is a buzzword, has been for years and years and years. I think about my own middle school experience. There was some not nice things going on. I don't know that I would call it bullying, but I definitely did not like some folk. And so bullying is unwanted aggressive behavior with a real or perceived power imbalance. So that can be due to lots of things, right? That can be due to the perception of not having money. That can be due to the perception of not being athletic. That could be due to that I don't fit in with this particular group. But it has to have a power imbalance. It has to be someone feeling like they have no control in the situation. So the one thing that, if you don't remember anything else about bullying, I want to say this out loud, is that bullying is not a one-time thing, or even like a thing that happens like once in a while. Bullying is a pattern that happens over and over and over again, right? And so just being aware that our kids all have the potential to be unkind. This morning it was because Hope opened the dishwasher that was clean and all heck broke loose at my house. But I would not consider my daughter a bully for calling him a doofus or whatever she called him. But I will say that I think that, when you're talking about being unkind, I would say you're being unkind right now. I would not use the term bullying, if that makes sense. We talk about it, but there's a decent amount, 19.5% of students report being bullied from 9th to 12th grade, which I think is interesting. So these are some of the things that I think are important, because we can't change the way kids are. Kids are kids. They've been kids for a long time, right? but we can help them figure it out, right? We can help them figure out what we expect and what we don't expect. How to respond as a teacher, as a parent, as a community member, quickly and consistently, right? The worst thing you can do is kind of ignore a behavior, right? An unkind behavior, because we know that we have to address those things because they may not know it is as kind as it is, right? Send a clear message that the behavior is not acceptable. I'm really good at this, by the way, sending a clear message that I don't think this is okay. And then talking about it very openly. And so I think part of what we do now is we're very protective of everybody, which is great. But if we're not talking about these things that are happening openly, no one's learning from them. And so that's kind of my concern. All right, so I think that's all about bullying. So I told you before, I don't believe in everybody gets a trophy. That's not my jam. I think other people probably really like it. But when we don't all get a trophy, what does that look like? It can look like celebrating our wins collectively, right? So this can be really easily done, right? School spirit days, they're coming up. They're very exciting. Everybody loves them. And that's important for our school to feel connected. One of the things that, we were in public school for a little bit and then we moved here. But one of the things that I loved about the traditions here is Halloween. Now, I like Halloween. So, of course, I love it. But I think that's such an important time for everyone participates. And it's so much fun. And I think that that's really important for these kids. And then just teaching our kids to encourage their friends. Okay. So when my daughter came home and said something about the spelling, I said, well, did you tell her that she did a good job? Like, I know you felt that way. But did you outwardly say it? And she said, yeah, I think so. I was like, okay, good. Because that's important for other people to feel supported. And I constantly tell people, if you're giving what you expect to receive, they will figure that out. And the next time you do something well, they're going to come to you and say, I really loved how you did this. Attending the events of our peers. None of our kids have driver's licenses. So this is a little harder, but I think it's important too. It's important to feel supported. Noticing someone and giving them genuine compliments. This is the part that makes my husband the most uncomfortable because I give a lot of people a lot of compliments because I really think things are beautiful and want people to know how much I notice them, right? They're not just people that are walking through my life. I notice you, right? And my husband's like, this is really weird that you complimented her eyebrows, but she had good eyebrows, like really good eyebrows. And so, I felt like she needed to know. So this is a Michelle Obama quote, your success will be determined by your own confidence and fortitude. I thought that's really great because that's, speaks to kind of. All right, I told you I do a lot of quotes. Kindness is loaning someone your strength instead of reminding them of their weaknesses. So I think that's so important. If you know that you are, good at something and somebody else may be struggling, offering assistance and, being that person for them. All right. So messages to our kids. This is hard. So when we're talking to our kids, we're not always our best selves. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm tired. And sometimes, I've had a kid sick for the last 500 days, because there's 3 of them and we just kind of roll through it. And so I get tired. And so sometimes I'm not my best self, right? So, but are our messages congruent with our expectations? So if I'm unkind, I apologize. Because there are times where I lose my mind and I yell at them and it has nothing to do with them, right? It has to do with getting out of the door in the morning. It's a very stressful event for me. And so when I am unkind, I recognize it and I say, hey, that had nothing to do with you. I'm really sorry, guys. And they respond really well to, they say, oh, Mom, it's okay. We knew you were having a tough time and you didn't sleep last night because Hope was in your room. Those kinds of things. So are we modeling healthy behaviors and communication? Are you sitting down with them and saying, tell me about school? Tell me about what happened on the playground, right? Now, I will say that can get overwhelming at times, especially if you have girls. I asked Hope what happened on the playground. I ate snack. I mean, like he has nothing to provide for this conversation. But when I ask my girls, they have all the things to say. And so we have to listen to all the things, but you show that you're genuinely interested in their experience. And that can be really difficult if you've heard the same thing 100 million times, right? And are we validating our child's emotions while providing another way to respond? So this is, I think, really important. So when you're saying you're having a tough time, I see that you're having a tough time. I see that you're really upset. And you think in your mind, why are they that upset? This is ridiculous, right? But you're trying to validate and be great at parenting and all the things. And so I really have to talk to myself. I'm really like, this is the 50th time we've talked through this and I don't want to talk about it again. But I'm saying, it sounds like it's been really hard for you. It sounds really tough. What are some ways that might help the situation? How can you make this better? And what can I do to help you feel better? So no one acts or experiences in a vacuum. So my kids chronically will say, so-and-so gets to do this. I don't know if y'all hear that as much as I do, but I hear that all the time. So-and-so gets to do this. They watch rated R movies. And I'm like, really? Rated R? That seems a little harsh. But they say this all the time. And I'm like, I don't really know that that's really what's happening. And, they'll say, well, I know that they're doing this. And I'm like, I think you probably don't know all the information. Just reminding your kids that whatever they're hearing are bits and pieces. They don't really know what's going on. Also, you're not getting a cell phone. Let me just be really, also that's not happening. So this is kind of my, tie it all together. Why is this important? And when Beverly talked to me, like, why did I immediately feel connection to this? And I think it's because I love family work. I love couples work. I love all these kinds of things. But this is why it's important. So the impact of kindness on a school system as a whole is huge, right? Because if we can get just a small section of our kids to be kind, we can change the dynamic, right? Of a classroom, of a place that they're in. So there's a family systems theory, which you don't have to know, there's no test after, that says that individuals are inseparable from their network of relationships. Now, this particular guy was talking about families, but I think we can broaden it and talk about classrooms. We can broaden it and talk about like our, places of, recreation, things that we do fun, all those things. Back to it's not a vacuum, right? Everybody has a role. So when encountering difficult problems, considering this perspective, we consider like the holistic kind of response. We consider what dynamics are at play, right? Now I'm a therapist, so that's the first thing I think about. Like when somebody brings me a situation, I'm trying to like think through it and figure out who's doing what to whom and how and why. I don't think other people do that as much. But those are kind of the way I try to think about very broadly. What roles were played? Now, I talk about this like nonstop. So what do you think they were thinking? What do you think they were trying to get at here? Because a lot of times I can even get my kids or clients or whoever to figure it out and go, oh, that's why they did that. Mm-hmm. And then they have a different experience of that person. Right? If you know why someone's doing something and it's no longer malicious, you have a totally different experience of who they are. And that can stop bullying and negative behaviors dead in its tracks if you can understand a person. What needs are being met, right? So what needs are being met by the unkind behavior? Is it a control thing? Is it an anxiety thing, right? Is it, I want to prove myself to someone? Because we can give that to them in a healthier way. And what needs are being ignored? Are they lonely? Are they isolated? Are they scared? Right? All of those things impact what kids do, what kids feel, what kids what their thoughts are, right? And so being aware of all of those things. I think it very much will affect school performance, right? I think if you feel safe to try new things in an environment because you feel supported and loved, you're going to try new things. You're going to, go out on that limb, right? You're going to be more creative because you feel like you can be. And just having the support, having people in the building to go to when you need something, right? I know all of us parents who are not in the building really want that for our kids. We want to know that they have a person, they have a contact person that they can go to if things are rough. And happy kids have more grit because they have the emotional reserves too. If your kid is not fearful, if your kid is not depressed, if your kid is not having a lot of inner conflict, they can really work hard because they feel like they can do it, right? And if they don't do it on the first shot, it's not a big deal, so it's fine. So, and the research says we all want our kids to develop grit. We all want humans to be able to be like, I'm just going to keep on moving, right? Okay, so those are the reasons I think this is important. So what are your thoughts? Oh, I did okay. What's worried? Does anybody have any thoughts? All right.
I love the idea or looking at competition for the good and the problems it can cause, because I do think we over rely on that as a way to try to almost motivate our kids.
Yes.
And,
Dangled carrot.
and even if we don't do that in the home, society does that in a big, big way. So
For sure.
seeing cooperation and competition side by side was enlightening for me.
Very cool. I do think that is one of the hardest constructs to teach our kids, like when to be competitive, because you need that, and when to dial it back, and you don't have to be the best at everything. Yeah.
And when we can be competitive while being cooperative, like what does it look like to be on a team and win all together?
For sure.
And
Absolutely.
that's super fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that.
One of my friends who's older, because I always like to have older people in my life that have kind of walked this road, their family has talked to ours and modeled and even taken our children on a lot of like service projects. Like, that they really believe that, giving back in the community and is an important role in creating empathetic and kind kids. And it's good to have people who are older and can do that with your kids, because in the moment, I don't think about adding another thing to my plate.
Oh, yeah.
But I've been so grateful that they will call on a Saturday morning and say, hey, we're going to go do this,
Yeah.
And my boys will talk about that a lot. And it's a gift I could not have probably given them. during the
Absolutely.
season, so.
Well, and I think if you're having somebody else invite them, that feels less like a chore that mom has said that we're doing, and more like, oh, this sounds like good, But I do think that our kids are, John and I talk about this all the time. Our kids are stupidly blessed. Our kids live a very sheltered, good life, right? And so we have to be the ones to tell them that the world is not all like that, and that, you have to be willing to help people and to do the right thing and all of those things. And I really don't think you can get that without doing kind of those service projects, those kinds of things, and talking through those things and being aware of those things. You want your kids to know what the world looks like, right? But we also want to, it's a hard place because you want to protect them from the world, but you also want them to know what the world looks like so that they're not shocked when they go to college and they're like, whoa, this is a different ballgame.
I like the idea of what you were talking about, like with your emotions at home with your kids. Like, it's okay to be angry sometimes in front of your kids, It's okay to have arguments in front of your kids, things like that. That is so healthy, and I think so many people try to hide it. They're like, this is behind door conversations. but that's how students develop,
Mhm.
you know, grit and
Yes.
things like that. They see it through their parents. So I think that's also important to
Absolutely. Yeah, they're watching everything like that goes on in your household like a hawk.
Yeah.
And you're not always your best human at your house. Like, and that's okay. It should be a place for you to be safe, right? And for you to have those big emotions and those big experiences, as long as you're honest about them. I'm a big proponent of being developmentally honest. And so when my kids ask me a question, I'm going to give them the answer, but I'm going to do it in a developmentally appropriate way. And so my oldest daughter recently was like, after a basketball practice, looked at me and was like, "Hey, is Santa real?" And I was like, and so, but then I felt like, okay, well, this is where we are. And so just making sure, and that's a funny example, but honestly, like it's just being developmentally appropriate in an honest way. And, there's been lots of questions recently about like the reproductive stuff. And so we've had those conversations that have been fun. And so my husband likes to try to run and I don't let him because I like to see him a little uncomfortable every once in a while. I'm like, no, this is what it is. You stay right here. I'll do the talking. Listen to it. Like I said, he likes to stay down here. That's his happy place. But I do think that it's to have those conversations and, married couples fight. We talk through that sometimes because, we'll have an argument and I am a heated person. I say things that are not nice. And so, just making sure that, your kids understand that that's normal. It's hard to live with someone. We all get on each other's nerves sometimes. You and your brother get on each other's nerves sometimes, and that's okay. Doesn't mean you're less family. Doesn't mean we're headed for divorce, because I think that's the scary part for them, right? Is like what bad could happen after this. And that's where the conversation afterwards is so important, right? Yeah.
My kid is not a talker and gets
Mhm.
annoyed with the questions.
Mhm.
How do I keep that going without?
So I have one that's similar. So what I try to do with her is I will say, hey, I will just remind her that I'm there, remind her that I'm open to things. And sometimes I'll even talk about my own experiences and see what I get. Like almost like a little fishing kind of like this happened to me when I was in middle school and it was not great. And that kind of thing. But I would not prod her with questioning if she's uncomfortable with it. Does that make sense? So just talk about your own experience and remind her that you're present.
Okay.
Because sometimes just being present is all that's needed if they feel like they're handling it.
Okay.
How do you, with the, you address the bullying and how like maybe you would respond to your child at home if they present something to you but what would you tell the child to actually do in that behavior,
Okay.
at school? Because that's tough for kids.
Right. So I hope this doesn't make you uncomfortable.
You would say, because then I'll tag into what I
Okay.
do, yeah.
Okay. So what I say, if I
And
feel
maybe if they're the victim of it, or if they're just witnessing, right? They might not even be a part of it. Because I like to teach my children, if you do see this and maybe you're not a part of it, you still need to be active
right.
in making sure this doesn't happen.
So when I think about the witnessing part, I think about go tell an adult you trust. I don't want my kids getting involved in that because that muddies the waters.
Okay.
So because I have one that will come in ready to go, and I don't need that. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't need that in my life. So I always tell her, and that's also knowing your own kid. Like I would never tell my middle child to stand up for somebody because she will take somebody down. Like that is not someone I'm gonna let loose on people. So, but I might say something to my oldest because she would be a little bit more tactful in what she says. But so if it's a witness thing, I always suggest going to an adult that you trust and not getting involved because you don't want to make that muddier for the person who's trying to figure out what's going on, right? because the adults are going to try to figure that out. For someone who's experiencing things, so often what I find when people are doing unkind behaviors, they do them really sneaky, because sneaky is the way to do it. And so I say make a lot of noise. I say if someone touches you and you don't like it, you yell. If someone says something to you that's hurtful, you say, no, do not say that to me. You make it so that someone notices what's happening. So that's my suggestion to my kids all the time. Because especially if you're the victim, you don't feel like you can go to somebody because you're afraid of the repercussions. But if you make another adult notice it, then the adult is handling it. You're no longer going to somebody else. So you make a big deal. You make it loud. That's what I tell my kids. I don't know what to tell.
I think that's good. I think it gets harder the older they get, right?
Yes.
And that's where I would still go to, like when we see with middle school, a lot of times we still advise them to go to their advisor, go to their trusted teacher, because if it's that pattern and there's that power imbalance, a lot of times it's done in secret, and the adult needs to go to the bully to say, we are aware.
We're aware.
We are watching, because sometimes it takes that adult, often it takes that adult to step in to take some of that power imbalance out.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed.
So verbally, but not physically. at
No,
all.
no.
That's what I.
Yes. It's always, when I suggest, it's always just make
Stand up for
yourself loud, and so that somebody will notice that something's going on. But yes, I do think going to a teacher is important too. I mean, telling somebody, and even if that's just telling me, and I think I'm like really good at feeling like I can handle it on my own, but sometimes I need to reach out to somebody at the school and say something, right? But like a lot of times I can kind of get them to a good place of something they can say back, or, and not in a disrespectful way, but just to shut it down, right? They're not going to say anything after you say this. And, one of my kids will come home and be like, that really worked. Yeah. So once we problem solve it, sometimes that can be really helpful. I think also being really aware about the patterns, because I think when we think about bullying, we tend to use it for everything. And I think unkind behaviors happen a lot more frequently. And so just being really clear about this being an unkind thing to do.
Thank you, Amanda, so much. You were phenomenal, and thank you for those online. Hopefully they were able.
We're down to one. We had a max of 6 at one point.
Oh, look at there.
Awesome. You are amazing, and I respect you so much. So thank you very much. Do you have contact information? I didn't know if you had it. I know she has her own counseling too. So if y'all ever,
If you've ever encountered issues.
yes, especially teenagers.
Yes.
She is phenomenal.
I love the teenagers.
Yes.
Have
at it.
I'm gonna put these up here.
I'm in it right now. So Mallory is a counselor at Henderson.
Oh,
So
bless you.
she, yeah. She does it.
What book you can have a classroom test.
I deal with it all the time.
All right, we are